working for you. A weekly talk radio program which highlights developments of national interest and the activities of your St. Kitts Nevis government. Join host Lesroy Williams as he presents news, views, reports, and interviews about everything regarding the activities of the Team Unity government and the building of our communities and the development of St. Kitts Nevis. Tune in and call in to interact with your government and share your views regarding the upward forward development of your community and our beautiful Twin Island Federation. Working for you is weekly, every Wednesday live from 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. on ZIZ Radio, Win FM, and Sugar City FM with rebroadcast on participating stations. Working for you.
Good afternoon, and we welcome you to another Working for You program. I am your host, Lesroy Williams. Today I have with me some esteemed guests from the telecommunications sector within the OECS. I have with me Mr. Cuthbert Manchester.
Thank you, sir.
Who is chairman of the St. Kitts and Nevis National Telecommunications Regulatory Commission Board, what is known as the NTRC Board. I have with me Mr. Quincy Prentice, who is director on the board of directors of the Eastern Caribbean Telecommunications Authority, known as ECTEL, and also Mr. Irvin Williams, who is the director of the St. Kitts and Nevis National Telecommunications Regulatory Commission Board. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to all of you.
Thank you, Lesroy.
Thank you. Okay. Today we are going to be discussing issues that are pertinent to the telecommunications sector within the OECS. We all know that the telecommunications is a big part, of course, of keeping us connected with one another, keeping us informed, keeping us educated, keeping us entertained. I am sure that almost everyone in St. Kitts has a television, cable, internet, cell phones, and the likes. So we can see how important this sector is to the growth, really, of our economies. So we are going to be delving into a lot of those issues. And I have with me very competent people to speak about the issues. I want to start with probably the sage on the panel, Mr. Manchester, Mr. Cuthbert Manchester, who is chairman of the NTRC in St. Kitts. Mr. Manchester, could you give us a historical background about the NTRC? What is it? Its role and function? How can the common man and woman access the NTRC? And a history of telecommunications in the region, from then to where we are now.
Wow. Thank you, Lesroy. The only problem with that last question is that it will take the rest of the afternoon.
Sure, but give us a synopsis. A synopsis.
And I'm not so sure that I'm qualified to be a sage. I might be an elder, but I'm not a sage. Anyway, telecoms in the Eastern Caribbean has been around for a couple of 100 years, and mainly driven in the OECS by Cable and Wireless West Indies Limited, as it was known then. We, and when I say we, the people of the Caribbean did benefit quite a bit from Cable and Wireless's involvement. And back in 1985, if I may come a little bit quickly into the modern day, the government of the day, who in St. Kitts and Nevis, the government ran the local telephone system. Cable and Wireless was only responsible for the international side of telecommunications. And then the government of the day took a policy decision to get out of the local telephone system and do a joint venture, for want of a better word, with Cable and Wireless. And so the firm of Scantel, and those of us who were around at the time would remember that Scantel was born. Now, they set Scantel up with a rather unique model at that time. More people are moving towards a similar type of arrangement, whereby the people of St. Kitts and Nevis were able to purchase shares in Scantel and participate in the telecom arrangement, for want of a better phrase, of having a full-fledged telecoms company that was, while not wholly locally owned, because Cable and Wireless owned the majority shares, the government owned some shares, and many people, myself included, were able, because I was on the staff, was able to purchase shares. And so it was something that worked. It was a win-win situation for everybody. That was in 1985. And at that time, and I would like to pose a question here, if we had a giveaway, if anybody could tell me in October of 1985 how many local telephones existed in St. Kitts and Nevis.
Well, I certainly can't tell you.
Would you hazard a guess, Mr. Williams?
10?
No, much more than that. Queens?
200?
No, a little more than that. Mr. Williams?
I would say no more than 100.
No, more than that.
More than 200.
No, it was actually 2,000.
2,000.
Yeah.
Wow.
2,000 household phones existed. And so you would find that many people, if you wanted to make a phone call in a village, you had to go to either the police station, the health center, or somebody who had a phone.
I remember when we had to go to, because I'm from Molyneux, but
Yeah.
we had to go to Freights and Sons.
Yes.
They had a phone,
Yes.
and that is where you would make a phone call. In that time, you had the thing, you
The black
turn
phone with the dial.
the dial.
Yes.
You turn it.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So you experienced.
I did.
Yes. And then a lot of development took place. Cable and Wireless invested some $10 million into upgrading the system, putting in a new telephone exchange, well, several actually, and improving the linkage between St. Kitts and Nevis. Again, how many calls could you have made simultaneously between St. Kitts and Nevis at that time? Any guesses? I'm doing that to put things in perspective.
I have no idea.
12
Okay.
maximum. And this was in 1985.
Yeah.
So we've come a long, long way.
Yes.
And to bring it further forward, then of course, as Pratt would say in his song The Slave, times changed
Yes.
in so many, many, many ways. And what actually took place was a realization that in 1995-96, there was a project funded by the Japanese looking at opening up the telecoms arena. And the project was actually run by Dr. Spencer Thomas out of Grenada. And the recommendation was that we need to get Cable and Wireless to terminate their monopoly, because they're the only ones who ran. In fact, it was interesting that the Telecoms Act at the time used to say there was a section in it, a clause, that says, it was the very last clause, I think it was clause 53 if my memory serves me right, but I'm subject to correction, that Cable and Wireless, its ears, and you know what the latter say, and subjects are not subject to the Telecoms Act. So they were running the telecom system, but not subject to the act that govern telecommunication.
Yes.
And so all those kinds of untidy things needed to be sorted out. And so the project took off, and they made the recommendation, and the governments of the day got together, the 5 governments in Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Dominica, and St. Kitts and Nevis. And a series of meetings took place with Cable and Wireless to encourage them to give up the monopoly. In the first instance, they were very, they didn't want to, understandably. You're running the thing, you're making a lot of money, and it's your loan, you have no competition, no challenge, no nothing. And so you have developed over the years a serious comfort zone. And what happened in the end was that there were threats to go to court and all, the usual posturing. And then what happened in the end was that, the way I would put it personally, good sense prevailed. And so and it was interesting that one of the main, I would say, concerns that they had was they're going to lose money. Turns out that never happened, right? And I'm not telling any tales out of school when I say that by the time the whole sectors opened up and people were being encouraged to apply for licenses to compete with the incumbent Cable and Wireless profits had shot up about 62%.
Sure.
The driving force for that shooting up was, of course, that they had also been encouraged to reduce international calling rates. And so more people started to make more phone calls. And the technology started to come into being. And I'm going to ask you another question. When do you think the internet came to St. Kitts? All these young fellas use internet every day.
That could have been about 15 years ago, maybe.
15.
What is 15 years? No.
More than 15.
More than that.
More than 15 years.
98.
19 what?
90. I said 90.
And you say? 98? Both of you wrong, but it's right between the two of you. 1995, October. And we started out with dial-up because that was the thing at the time. And, they used to give out a nice little pretty folder telling you how to use dial-up to get on the internet. And people like the Bar Association, the lawyers were ecstatic because now they could go on LexisNexis to get their, references and so on. And so it brought a lot of benefit. And so everybody, after the whole money thing was sorted out and competition started, everybody started smiling. Because you know what competition does? It forces prices down. And people had a choice. They had another option. And that went on very, very well. When you consider the many meetings, the battles, the fights, not literally, but figuratively, that we had in order to get this whole thing off and running. And we have a lot of people in the region that we need to thank. I'm not going to name them, but a lot of them, a lot of people don't know who they are, but I'm sure that they sit back and with some sort of pride and said, and I'm one of them, I could tell you.
Yes.
And I'm so happy to still be associated with telecommunications, especially in my hometown, and to have people like young Prentice here, who I have a lot of time for. He's a bright lad, and he loves telecoms as much as I do, or maybe more, because he has more to work with. In the old days, we had tablets and smartphones and so on.
You have the modern equipment.
Yeah, and when you think about it, I still have the first cell phone. I'm afraid to let anybody put their hands in it because I don't want it to disappear.
Okay, sure.
Right.
Now, just give us a brief background of the NTRC, its role and its function.
Well,
I know it's a sub of the ECTEL, of course, but I'll come to you with that question, of course.
The thing is that the NTRC is one pillar of the telecoms regulatory machinery. It's actually divided up into three bits and pieces. There's a Council of Ministers, the Council of Telecommunication Ministers. That is the ministers responsible for telecoms in the 5 ECTEL states. The second pillar is, of course, ECTEL itself, the Eastern Caribbean Telecoms Authority, based in St. Lucia, as a supra-national entity. I think that's what the lawyers call it. In the sense that it is like a mini UN, just for clarity. And then, of course, the third piece at the national level in each of the 5 states is the NTRC.
Yes.
Now, the National Telecoms Regulatory Commission, set up by the Telecoms Act, is the front line to the regulatory process. ECTEL, the Eastern Caribbean Telecoms Authority, they seek to provide support as the umbrella organization. And they provide support at the engineering level, they provide support at the legal level, and they provide support at the economic level. And so they translate basically policy that comes down from the Council of Ministers, who have a responsibility to make sure that telecoms work for everybody and contributes significantly or practically to our local economies in the 5 states. And so what happens then is that somebody has to take that policy position, articulate it, and put it in a manner in which we at the national level can execute.
Sure.
And that's one of the functions of ECTEL. And Mr. Prentice here is on the board.
Yes.
And so they buffer the pressure from the ministers down to Mr. Williams and I. You know, so that we don't. And he's very good at it. I could tell you that, Mr. Prentice.
Mr. Prentice, now,
Yes.
could you tell us a little bit more about ECTEL, its role and its function? I know he mentioned that it is comprised of 3 components: the Council of Ministers, and you have the NTRCs in each member state, and the regional directorate. But
Yes.
could you tell us?
Yes, so ECTEL stands for the Eastern Caribbean Telecommunications Authority. It was established in 2000, May 4th of 2000, by a treaty signed in St. George's, Grenada, and a treaty between five regional governments: Grenada, Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and Grenadines, and St. Kitts and Nevis. It basically acts as the regulatory body for telecommunications in the member states, and as Mr. Manchester would have pointed out, it's comprised of the 3 main components: the Council of Ministers, the Regional Directorate, which is based in St. Lucia, and the NTRC, which essentially acts as the local arm of ECTEL in each of the member states. Right. The Council of Ministers basically comprises of all of the ministers with responsibility for telecommunications in the respective territories. So, for instance, in the case of St. Kitts and Nevis, the Honorable Vincent Byron, the Attorney General, will be the representative on the Council of Ministers, and you would have a representative from each territory. The Board of Directors also is comprised of 1 member from each of the each member state, and an alternate. So in the event that one of the directors is not available, the alternate would take that person's place. And then finally, the NTRCs, they are basically the regulators at the national level for each member states. Each member state, sorry. So they are responsible for processing applications, advising the ministers at a local level as it regards to things such as licenses and the like. I would like to touch on one thing. One major issue that we have going on right now throughout the region is the reform process. Mr. Manchester would have mentioned the Telecoms Act of 2000, which is basically what established ECTEL in its current state, and the NTRCs. We have basically come to a point where, through the dynamism of the telecoms industry, advancements that have been made in technology, we're at a point where the existing act can no longer work for us. And as such, we're currently undergoing a process of reform where we're looking to launch a new, what as it's called, the Electronic Telecommunications Bill. This bill takes care of a number of issues that are currently prevalent throughout a number of the member territories. If you look at the telecommunications industry, for instance, throughout ECTEL, it's currently characterized by an increasing rate of fixed and mobile broadband penetration. In the case of St. Kitts and Nevis, for instance, we have a mobile penetration rate in excess of 156%. So if you were to break that down into layman's terms, it essentially means that you have more cell phones than people in St. Kitts and Nevis. Wow. A lot of people walking around with 2 cell phones, probably.
Yeah, and I think that's the point.
That's what it reflects.
Yes, right.
No, there's a social aspect to that which we
Yes.
won't go into because we got some young fellas here, but they will understand what I mean.
But
Wha-
we should
Why
delve
do
into the social
people have
aspect
more
as
than
well.
one cell phone? Some people have 3. With 3 different numbers.
Of course, because of course we know that when you're calling from one network to another network, of course the charges are more.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is true.
That is one.
That is one. Keep going.
Also, I don't know if you want to keep one for the
Send them
some
all.
people and some for other people. So you kind of
Yes. And that is the social aspect of
Yes.
having more than one cell phone.
Yes.
Apart from the economics.
Right.
It costs you more to call across to another network.
Yeah.
But go ahead. Sorry.
No problem. So, I mean, if I may,
yes.
so we are characterized by an extremely high penetration rate, both in terms of mobile phones and actual mobile broadband penetration. Over the past 5-6 years, if you look at the actual utilization of the various types of services, though, you would notice that there has been a marked shift from what's considered traditional telecom services to what you would consider IP-based, Internet Protocol-based, or what's called the over-the-top services. These services are traditionally apps that you would have on your smartphone, such as WhatsApp, Skype, Magic Jack, or even in multimedia. In the multimedia world, you have IP set-top boxes such as Roku, Evolve, instant messaging such as WhatsApp, Viber that have basically taken the place of traditional text messaging.
Yes.
You also have things such as video on-demand services such as Netflix, Hulu, that are taking the place of traditional cable TV. So as you can see, there is a gradual shift from the traditional services that would have been provided by the existing telecoms companies to a lot of services that are IP based, in layman's terms, basically based on the internet. What does this mean for us? It means that a number of companies, these existing companies that would have essentially grown and built their business models on these traditional services, are now having to evolve as the consumers change their behavior. As a regulator, you also have to evolve. As governments, we also have to evolve, because if it affects the service providers who are hiring persons, who are responsible for paying taxes, who are responsible for paying licensing fees, it's going to affect you eventually.
I remember at one time there was this talk about some of these service providers wanting to block those what you call them, VoIP,
Over-the-top services.
over-the-top services and so OTT.
Yes.
Like you can make a call on your WhatsApp, or you can make a call and so on.
And so issues like that are issues that the draft legislation seeks to address. What you're referring to is a concept that's typically referred to as net neutrality, network neutrality, whereby a service provider is not allowed to differentiate or block services based on where the service originates, where its final destination, or based on the type of service that it is. And ECTEL, as a regulatory body, we support the concept of net neutrality, which basically states that you should treat all internet traffic the same.
The same.
Right? So you don't want to block any type of service, be it WhatsApp, Viber, Skype, Magic Jack. Why would you want to block that? For a simple reason, if your business model is based on these traditional services, where consumers are basically replacing the use of these traditional services with over-the-top services, you stand to lose money, right? So it's in you, as a service provider, it would be in your best interest to block these services.
Well, that's one way of dealing with it.
Yes.
Yeah. The other way of dealing with it is to get on board with the over-the-top services
Well,
yourself,
yes.
and
Yes.
you know,
Innovation.
and innovate. That is why the term over-the-top services as disruptive.
Yes.
Disruptive,
considered
because they disrupt the traditional way of telecommunicating, if there's such a word.
Yeah.
And so you know,
Yes.
it's unfortunate, in my view, and permit me, Quincy, to that service providers who have been in the business for a long time get stuck in their old business model and don't innovate, don't change, don't move with the times, don't move with what's happening in the industry, and it creates too many problems, not only for the customers, for their customers, for themselves. Because a business, you know, if you fail to innovate, you're gonna fail. It's as simple as that. You know, because businesses are dynamic and it moves, it keeps going.
So in addition to the gradual shift in consumer behavior as it relates to the use of over-the-top services, we've also seen in the region over the past 5 years more market consolidation. Over the past 3 years, we would have seen a merger between Cable and Wireless and Columbus Communications. Now, while that may not have affected us directly in St. Kitts and Nevis, in 3 of the ECTEL member states, that has basically created a situation where island-wide there's basically a single fixed operator, basically back to the days of 2000.
We've come full circle.
Right. So, as you can see, we need to be prepared as a country and as a regulator to be able to handle these things.
Sure.
Right. So that is another situation that we've come across. Additionally, we noticed that throughout the region, you find that a lot of the operators are what you call vertically integrated. Now, what this simply means is that if you are, let's say, you are a restaurant owner, if you are vertically integrated, you would control all of the different sectors that you use as your inputs.
All the chains of
All of the stages of the supply chain, as it were. So you may own a supermarket, you may own a farm. So essentially you capture all of the different industries that you would require as your inputs. How does that translate to telecommunications? Now, in the case of the telecommunications industry, you would find vertical integration causes a single company to own what's called the local loop, which is basically that infrastructure that connects your house or your business to a telecommunications network, right? That telecommunications network or telecommunications provider also owns the undersea fiber that connects St. Kitts and Nevis to the rest of the world. What does that mean in business terms? If I'm a telecoms provider and there's my competitor who needs access to that same infrastructure, it makes it difficult for that competitor to make headway in the market. And from a regulatory standpoint, it would be in our best interest we're trying to encourage competition. Right?
Yes, Mr. Prentice, you've said a lot and
Yes.
quite a mouthful, but I think the audience wants to hear in terms of the update, in terms of legislative framework
Yes.
of telecommunications to meet modern needs and so on. This new electronic communications bill, what is in it to protect the rights of consumers. Are the rights of consumers clearly articulated and addressed in this bill?
Yeah, I would say 110% yes. There are a number of sections in the new bill that seeks to address one, quality of service. Because as you would know, any user of telecom services in St. Kitts and Nevis has encountered an issue, be it with your internet going down or your internet dropping periodically.
Sometimes no internet.
Sometimes no internet. Sometimes you're using the cell phone.
The other day, I
So-
thought something was wrong with my phone. I have a flow, and it wasn't flowing at all. I mean, I was calling Digicel numbers, and I realized that I was getting a recording saying that I'm unable. And I checked with a few other people, and they were having the same problem. And Digicel, people with users of Digicel,
Cell phone.
cell
service.
phone, could not get through to Flow.
Customers.
So
I'm a consumer. How will that be addressed?
how will it be addressed? Well, first of all, in the act itself, but more so in the regulations. The regulations speaks to quality of service. So there are under the new regime, there will be specific KPIs, key performance indicator, that each service provider will have to meet. It could be in terms of your bandwidth. Do you know what bandwidth is, Mr. Willis?
Tell me.
Well, bandwidth is basically speed, right? So you think of
Speed and space.
speed and space. So if you think of a pipe, if you have water, everybody has water at home. If you have a 1-inch pipe, that carries less water than if you have a 2-inch pipe, right? So that basically bandwidth refers to the capacity of the pipe, as it
Sure.
were, in internet terms. Now, you go to a service provider and you say you want, bandwidth is measured in megabits per second. You go to a service provider and say, I want a line that has a capacity of 6 megabits per second. Who says that you're really getting 6 megabits per second? And that is what the quality of service regulations would seek to address, to ensure that a consumer who purchases a specific package is really getting what they're paying for. In addition to that, what happens when a consumer suspects that they're not getting what they're paying for? The new regulations and the draft bill also addresses that in the form of how do you deal with complaints, what is the procedure for complaints, and also if there's a situation where there's a dispute between a consumer and a service provider, how that dispute is resolved. There is, under the new regime, a tribunal will be established that will seek to assist in getting all of these issues resolved.
Okay.
So I think definitely under the new regime, it's basically no comparison to what we have now. I think the regulatory body has a vast array of tools that will enable them to deal with the quality of service issues and also the consumer protection issues.
Sure. Mr. Williams, we have, but there's a particular question I want to ask in terms of roaming charges in the OECS single space. Why are they so expensive? Why do we have to pay roaming charges? For example, if I have a chippy phone and I am in St. Martin, I can call the ABC countries, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, and I don't have to pay, and it's like a local call. Why, when I travel to Antigua or any member state of ECTEL, why do I have to pay roaming charges? And why are they so expensive? Tell me.
Well, you've directed the question at Mr. Williams, but if I'm,
Sorry. No, I thought, no, wait. Okay. To answer
I know what I
that,
was
Mr.
saying.
Williams. Likewise, currently there are a lot of discussions going on about single space, economically, and for immigration purposes, we have a single space, and the question has been asked about the single space for telecommunications. As it is now, Mr. Prentice just spoke a while ago about the revision of the legislation. One of the legislation that we are currently reviewing and he was mindful not to present it because it's still a thing
In process.
that is being put together through public consultation. So one of the proposal we're looking at coming out of this and into proper regulations for roaming in the ECTEL member states within the OECS is to have what we call a flat rate roaming. That's the first approach. That means that if you're paying 15 cents a minute home here, St. Kitts and Nevis, when you go to St. Lucia, Grenada, Dominica, any one of those ECTEL member states, that minute will still cost you 15 cents. As opposed to because you're in St. Lucia, it's 45 cents.
Right.
So that's the first approach. And this approach that we're looking at is modeled off of the European approach, which has, I think, is 27 member states. In the ECTEL region, we only have 5. What they did in Europe was they started with a fee. They started with a small fee until they got to the point where they fully have now in 2017, I think it was April of this year, they abolished roaming altogether across the European states. So we are moving in that direction, starting with, of course, legislation, because as it is now, there is no legislation whatsoever to manage or regulate roaming. So when you get your bill is your bill. To say it that way, not being unfair, but to say it that way, your bill is your bill. And we know it's a problem because when we listen to the Council of Ministers talk, when we listen to the other heads of state talk, that's a major sticking point for them. Do something about roaming. It's not fair, it's not right. So we're trying to do something about it now, and so we have public consultations on the way to address roaming.
Okay, you wanted to add something.
Well, I think he's added quite a bit, but I've added. But I do think that, I mean, that is something that's currently being looked at, as Mr. Williams would have indicated, through the public consultation. Certainly, you would like to think that we're under essentially a single regulatory regime throughout the 5 ECTEL member states. So I think you're exactly right. There should be no reason why we have to pay roaming charges when we travel amongst these countries. As a matter of fact, if you look at the infrastructure in some of these countries, if you're making calls, sometimes the calls actually are routed from one island to the next in terms of them being terminated.
Whoa.
But yet still, if you go to another island, you're required to pay roaming charges when there's literally no difference in terms of the way the calls are actually being routed. The only difference is where your home base is and where you're making the call
I
from.
mean, to support what Mr. Prentice just said, if you were to look back into the history of what roaming means, how it came about and what it stands for, roaming really means you walk from one man's network to another. You roam onto another network.
Sure.
To support what Prentice just said, you're really not walking onto another network. Because when you leave here, it's the same network.
Flow.
And all those traffic are actually centralized somewhere, Jamaica, Antigua.
Yes.
They go to the same spot. So there's really no cost concern. And roaming came out of the fact that you're using my network to make calls back to your home base.
Yes.
And so my network is bearing some burden. And there must be a cost attached to that burden. Well, in this case, it's a single network. We have established that. So we are working vigorously, quietly but smoothly towards the aspect of getting roaming to be completely removed from within the OECS ECTEL member states.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a point. If you would remember 2 or 3 years ago, at that time it was Lime, not Flow, and they were talking about roam like your home.
Yes.
Y'all remember that? Roam like your home, and therefore, and then suddenly it stopped.
I remember.
Right. I am not certain of the reason it stopped. They would probably say that they were losing money. I don't know. We don't have any evidence either way to make a determination as to why it stopped. But the fact is, it set a precedent, and it is something that is going to be followed up, because if for 18 months or whatever period of time it was, you could promote and offer roam like your home, then you'll have to tell us why you're no longer roaming like your home, why you have stuck back on roaming charges.
Yes.
Because there must be a justification. One of the principles of the regulatory framework is that you ought not to change pricing without consultation with the regulators. And change means that you can increase them or you can decrease them willy-nilly. There must be a consultation. Right, Quincy?
So, will the new EC bill
Yes.
address issues like this? Because, let's face it, it's the consumer that suffers.
Yes. Yeah, most definitely. You would find this in the consumer protection regulations, which I would have mentioned before, where, for instance, if you have all contracts, I think as they are now, all consumer contracts must be passed before the NTRC, as it would be newly constituted. They must be approved by the NTRC. You're not able to change rates willy-nilly, as Mr. Manchester would have indicated. I think there's a 30-day period where you have to inform the customer prior to the rates having been changed. So there are lots of different constructs.
Okay, that is what is to come.
Yes.
In this bill. Do you have any idea when it will probably be brought to the parliaments of the OECD countries? And secondly, we're talking about what is to come. What is there now in terms of consumer protection regulation? What is there now?
There's very little in the way of consumer protection.
At least for telecommunication.
Yes.
So the consumer is really at a disadvantage.
It is.
Yes, which is why the EC bill needs to be passed as soon as possible, because it does offer the regulator many more tools to do its job, and it offers much more comfort to the consumer. Consumer protection traditionally has always been at the food level, and to some extent the manufacturing level, although we don't do a lot of manufacturing. But in terms of provision of services, there was never a comprehensive approach to that side of our lives.
Sure. Now, I am aware of this, but I don't know if you can help me here. But is there any plan for the establishment and installation of an IXP in the Federation? That is Internet Exchange Point.
Who want to tell you?
Well, currently, it's a very good question. Currently, and if I may go back before we get to current events, if I may go back, St. Kitts and Nevis was actually the first within the Caribbean region to attack that situation of establishing an internet exchange point, an IXP.
Perhaps you should explain to the general public what exactly.
Yeah, in
is it.
layman's term,
What
you
is
tell
an
us
IXP?
what it is.
Yeah, I think
because I
that'd be
understand
good,
that, you know, when you think you have to go all the way up to Miami. and
Well,
all.
good. Well, to keep it simple,
Yes.
and as we like to say, layman's term, an IXP is a switch that keeps local traffic local.
Yes.
So in other words, if Quincy Prentice is sending an email to me, currently that goes to Miami, switch and return. If somebody in St. Martin is sending an email to me, that goes to Miami, probably through Puerto Rico, switch and return. Likewise, if your department in government is trying to send something over to the Inland Revenue, that finds itself to Miami, switch and return. Now that's local data. Some of it might be private and confidential. And you look at it in two aspects. One, where the information is of national interest and private and confidential, why do you want to risk having it traverse other territories to get back to you when you could safeguard it by putting in an IXP and have it rerouted safely within territory, within region? That's one. Secondly, speed of delivery. It would cut the delivery time in nanoseconds. And so currently there is a committee which is spearheaded by the IT department, which is headed by Amicia Mossinden,
Yes.
who is also a member of the Board of Commissioners for the local NTRC. And so there's a committee currently who is building that framework. St. Kitts Nevis, we have the switch. The switch is available. It's at the IT facility. So they're building the framework now, which is going to include policies and procedures, because you just cannot put down a switch and ask all the providers to interconnect to it without having proper policies and procedures as to how it's going to be managed, used, and be supervised in times of maintenance and so forth. So that is being worked on. I think we should have it. I don't want to speak for Ms. Mossinden, but I think we should have it probably within the first half of next year or before.
That is the installation of it.
That's right. But I know it's being worked on robustly now. There's a committee in place. I think it's headed by Mr. Pay Boring from the IT department. So he's doing some good work in that front, and we'll have that IXP up and running in short order.
Okay. What would be the benefit of having it?
I think one of the main benefits would be, well, there are several benefits. One, I would think, would be cost, because obviously if you have, instead of having data traversing all the way to the States or some other international location, just to come back, you're keeping all of that data local. So if you were to look at it, if you wanted to call, let's say you wanted to call me in Nevis, what is happening now is the equivalent of you making an international call to call me, even though we are on the same island. What would happen once the IXP is deployed would be the equivalent of you making a local call.
Sure.
So in layman's terms, that is one benefit, cost to the service providers. Secondly, you would think that the performance would improve. Why? Because you're obviously traversing much shorter distances. If you were to take a flight from here to Miami, it takes about 3 hours each way, right? So you're taking 6 hours round.
And it's cheap. It's cheaper.
It's cheaper.
It's cheaper than to go from here to Miami.
Yes.
Than it is sometimes to go to Antigua. These are some of the
Well,
problems.
that's
that we're
another
having.
issue.
Yeah, that's a total other
That's
issue.
another.
I know, but
You're opening a can of worms.
Yes, yes,
So we're looking at the performance. Thirdly, in terms of what it can do for local content creators and local companies that host websites, that's also a tremendous benefit, because not only we're no longer just looking at St. Kitts and Nevis as being consumers of technology, logging on to Facebook or Netflix or what have you. We're looking to encourage the local content creators and the local hosting services as well. So by having an IXP in place, what you're doing is that you're bringing your consumers and your producers closer to each
Closer
other,
together, yeah.
right? So instead of having to endure that 6-hour trip to Miami and back, you're doing maybe a 45-minute boat ride over to Nevis in internet terms. So that would greatly improve the performance.
Sure.
By improving the performance, you're encouraging persons to consume local content, and
Sure.
you're encouraging persons to create local content as well.
Mr. Manchester, why has it taken us so long? I mean, you have a Telecommunications Act since 2000 that really established ECTEL. And here we are, almost 2 decades later. And yet, the legislation is pretty outdated, needs to be brought up to speed.
Yes.
And in all that time, really, because we don't have, updated legislation, basically it's a consumer that I am hearing that has suffered. For example, The legislation does not encapsulate consumer protection regulation. The consumer is at a disadvantage. For all these years, why has it taken us so long?
It's part of the human condition. You cannot take the act from 2000 and go line by line and change things. It doesn't work that way.
It has been amended a few times, hasn't it?
Exactly,
The Telecommunications Act.
and that tells you the point. You have to take a point in the future and say, as of then, we are going to have a full, comprehensive new legislation. And then you have to work at it. It's not easy to do, because remember, every day that you're working at it, the industry is changing.
Yes.
And changes are constant, and so one has to be very careful. We tend to boast, for instance, that St. Kitts was the first member state to come out with the new Telecoms Act in 2000. But St. Kitts was also the first state that had to do 2 or 3 amendments.
Yes.
You understand? So it's all well and good to come first, but if you come in first, you have to keep running the race over and over to maintain first.
There were 2 amendments, though.
Yes.
There were
There was
2.
one in 2000.
Yeah.
That's right.
Um,
It was a slight
12,
amendment.
yes.
Yeah.
And then there was one, of course, in 2001
Yeah. One of the
that had to do with the extending the period of license.
And
Yes.
that's where it stopped.
and that's
And
where
that's where it stopped.
yes. But when you compare to Dominica and St. Lucia, they didn't have to do those amendments because we did them. They just slid them into their act. If you catch my drift. Now the EC bill is very, very comprehensive. It has a lot in it, and therefore you couldn't do that overnight because you had to have a vision and project. Well, where is technology likely to go? Although our regime is technology neutral, we still have to kind of visualize where technology is going so that the same consumer protection you're talking about can be dealt with in a manner whereby you don't provide any disadvantage to our consumers as we go along. Now, the other process is something that I am very happy for, and that is the principle of public consultation. It is important that people buy into what you're doing,
Yes.
right? And they will buy in much easier if they felt that they had a hand in it. And so we have, how many we have going right now? 2?
Currently,
Yeah. Or just 1?
we have we're reviewing the interconnection rates. We're
Yeah.
setting up the roaming bill,
That's 2.
and there might be another one. It's
Right.
probably 3 public consultations now.
But the principle of public consultation is important because you can't just go in the, well, you could,
Yes.
but you ought not to just go in the parliament and pass a law and say, oh, now you obey. Doesn't work that way.
For the consumer, it's the right to information as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And therefore, you put the thing out there and you get feedback. And we have gotten feedback. And we've gotten feedback not only from consumers, but we've gotten feedback from service providers. Because they are stakeholders in this whole thing too. And therefore, it takes long because of the fundamental mechanics of getting it done.
And-
Part of the human condition.
And if I may, in support of the chairman's answer, Lesroy, your question was about length. Not to say that we should not have done it sooner, but in the United States currently, our brother, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, operates under an Act of 1934. Still. So we're doing way better.
We're doing
We're doing good.
grandiose.
This under Act of 1934. That is why they're being dragged into court so often on many modern issues, like the issue of net neutrality that Prentice
Yes.
spoke
Yes.
about early. They were taken to court by Comcast and the other telecommunications provider there over the fact that the FCC said to them, don't block anything. You have to keep it open, like we're insisting here that everything
Yes,
should
so-
be treated equally. And
Yeah.
they took the FCC to court and lost the case. The FCC lost the case on the grounds that the internet is a modern facility, it's a modern thing, and cannot be governed under the old laws.
Sure.
So the court simply told
In
the
other words-
FCC that they're outdated.
You had no authority to tell them not to.
So are you saying that we have, better quality service than they do?
No.
No.
I'm not
It's-
saying
no,
that.
that's not the issue.
No.
That's not the
We're
issue.
looking at the governance issue.
The governance
The
issue.
governance
Right.
issue. Yeah.
However, to go back to the chairman's point of public consultation, to answer some more about the length, the public consultation takes on several stages.
Yes.
In that the document is prepared, the working paper is prepared in consultation with ECTEL and the NTRCs, legally checked for correctness and so forth, and be sent out to all the stakeholders, which includes the general audience, the general public, all telecommunications providers, and any other persons who might have interest in responding to the document. So we would invite what we call a first round of comments. Those comments will be dissected, analyzed, and put together again by us and resubmitted back to the stakeholders for a second round of comments. Out of that second round of comments, we would do what you call an adaptation. We would adopt a position as regulators. When I say we, I speak as regulators. At the time of adopting a position is where the friction starts. Because when, like in the case with ECTEL, having adopted a position on net neutrality, the pushback starts coming. Oh, you can't tell me, don't block. And you can't tell me, don't interfere. So the process slows down, because you have to now get them back to the table to come to a central point of agreement.
Yes.
And so that's some of the reason for the length of time the regulations have been sitting here for.
If I may jump in as well, I mean, if it's kind of difficult because in the case of the 5 ECTEL member states, you're looking at 5 territories that are nowhere near as developed as the United States. So in as much as we have a Telecoms Act of 2000 and you have the FCC operating under legislation from the 1930s, they also have supporting legislation that's much more mature than what we have. In the US, you have much more mature consumer protection legislation than we have.
Yes.
In general, we don't have consumer protection legislation in our territories. You also have competition legislation that, for instance, if you are to try to do a merger between 2 companies, that merger has to be approved. I think it might be by the SEC. We don't have those constructs here in the
The
ECTEL,
SEC and the Department of Justice.
on the
both of them.
in the ECTEL
Okay.
member states. So we're now having to include in our Telecoms Act, we have a section that deals with consumer protection.
Sure.
We have a section that deals with competition and sections that assist, that give you the teeth to handle things such as mergers that are non-existent basically in your legislation. So
Okay.
those are things that we have.
I
to
wanted
do.
to just make a point on the competition issue. I recall while I was working at ECTEL that the topic was being discussed. I was going to say bandied about, but that would be unkind. It was being discussed. And there was a paper was developed and circulated. And CARICOM came down and said, no, y'all can't do that. We have competition laws coming out. This was in 2000. 17 years later, have we seen any competition law come out from CARICOM? You understand the point I'm
It's a
making?
rhetorical question.
Right. And therefore, it's issues like that that had to be dealt with at the telecoms level in the EC bill because nothing else exists.
And these are not issues that are peculiar to the telecoms industry.
No.
However, I think as a regulatory body, we're taking this step to attempt to deal with these issues from a telecoms perspective. But these are issues that could happen in any other industry.
Okay.
You know.
Gentlemen, we have to go to the phone line. You have your headphones, and we'll put them on. We have to hear from the people. And we're going to open the lines. The numbers to call, the local number is 465-2555. That is 465-2555. And the international number is 1-718-577-2916. That's 1-718-577-2916. We welcome your calls. Working for you, good afternoon.
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Williams.
Good afternoon, sir.
And good afternoon, Mr. Manchester and Mr. Otto Radio.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You call in lot today.
Calling very low. Calling very low.
I have a question. Now, if we all are in the CARICOM family, how come we cannot operate like how the 50 states in America operate when it comes to using the phone? You could stay in California and call somebody in Alaska, and it is not considered to be long distance or overseas. And we are in the CARICOM. How come I cannot stay in St. Kitts and call somebody in Trinidad? And it is just like how in America, how it has to be considered overseas. That's the question number one. And why is it we are having this problem for weeks now with flow? We move from cable and wireless, where we had a load of wire bungalow, to more technical thing. We come to Scantel, and then we come over to Line. And from Line now we go on to Flow, and Flow got us flourishing all over the place. We can't get no good service for our money. And as soon as the last year me go in the cash bank, they're telling you ain't got enough fund. I don't think we're getting the service for the kind of money that we are paying. Thank you very much.
Thank you, caller.
Do you have another caller?
No, at the moment, no. Who would like to tackle that question?
Which one? He asked two questions.
Well, anyone.
The first one, with respect to when he compared California, calling from California to Alaska, and why we can't call from St. Kitts to Trinidad and it be treated the same way. There are two fundamental issues here. One of which is that it's a totally different jurisdiction, and they have a whole different legislative framework, A. And B, from California to Alaska, they're still on the same piece of land. So geographically, not that that is a reason that it ought not to happen, right? And I take his point. The difficulty is the way telecoms in the Caribbean grew up. It grew up as, how many islands we got in the Caribbean? In CARICOM.
Just say a lot.
Each island in CARICOM was treated, was on its own, right? It was on its own. Telecoms was developed in each island separately and distinctly different, and because it was an easy excuse to say, in St. Kitts are gonna call Trinidad and making an overseas call, and that's the way the business model was developed at the time. It is not easy to change that. It's gonna take a lot of work. But I think we have taken the initial first steps with respect to the roaming issue that we discussed earlier.
I think we can't lose sight of the fact that there's a distinct difference between calling within the U.S., which is basically one country.
Yes.
So they're under a single regulatory regime, which is the FCC.
Mm-hmm.
A company that operates, let's say, New York, is quite likely to operate in California.
Or Alaska, for that
Or
matter.
Alaska.
Yeah.
Whereas in the Caribbean, we're all basically independent territories. I mean, you're dealing with several regulatory regimes. You're quite likely dealing with several different telecommunications providers.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I might be calling from Nevis. I may be calling Antigua. I might not necessarily be calling a subscriber from the same network or the same company. So it's actually quite different. In as much as we're relatively small, relatively close together, based on the fact that we are not under a single space or single regulatory regime, I think that would be one issue. Notwithstanding that, however, I think that that's an issue that we alluded to earlier when we referred to the single space with regards to roaming at least within ECTEL.
Yes.
If not within the wider region, at least within ECTEL, and I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, we have another caller. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Williams.
Good afternoon, sir.
And good afternoon to you, good gentleman there.
Good afternoon.
Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon.
Gentlemen, now, the smartphone, I think that the smartphone really carrying out where they are a smartphone, because as far as I'm concerned, outsmarting us, the consumers who use those phones. Let me tell you something. Up to this morning, my girlfriend just bought a phone 3 months ago. And up to this morning, she telling me that she phone acting up, getting trouble. And it come like she got to go buy a phone again. I said, that means you're working for Skeleton.
Who?
You're working for Skeleton. Because you just bought your phone the other day. And you're going to go buy your phone again.
Working
And
for
some people
Skeleton.
with they got this problem with the smartphone. Sometimes they feel your money just gone off the phone just like that. And I want to know next thing again. Why I mean not correct, Lord.
Flow
Why Flow?
or Digicel.
Yeah, why Flow? No, I'm talking more Flow now. Why Flow don't sell the ordinary Nokia phone and the Samsung phone? Because ordinary people, like elderly people and so, cannot use those phones, these smartphones. Up to the day I buy a phone for a gentleman, and I've got to take it back. Because he cannot use it. He's up to the technology of those phones, and I got to go somewhere else to see if I get a phone for him regarding the numbers, and that he could dial the number and call people from different places. And I want to know why Flow don't sell those phones. I know he can sell them still. But he said that he more people who got service with much in Flow. So I could not buy a digital phone for him. I got to buy a Flow phone. So I got to buy it because a private enterprise. So why is now Flow don't sell those phone anymore? All right then.
Okay.
Well, Sir Williams, I don't think we could answer for Flow.
No.
They have this business decisions to make. But I think the principle that he's expounding is valid. That, one of the things that happens to us as human beings is that we make an assumption not necessarily of the least common denominator. And that is that, well, everybody got a cell phone and is a smartphone. But we have people who can't use smartphones. And therefore they need just a basic instrument to make a call or receive a call. They're not into WhatsApp, they're not into internet, they're not into them kind of things.
So Manchester, we have another call. Working for you, good afternoon.
It's gone.
Working for you, good afternoon. We've lost that caller. Mr. Manchester, you could.
Yes, so, but it's a business decision that Flow has to make. And as regulators, we don't get involved in those things.
If I may, in furtherance of the question on end user devices, cell phones, the only thing the NTRC has to do with these devices is via what we call a type approval process. In that, while the company can sell whatever end user device it wants to sell, as the chairman said, from a business point of view, all such devices, before they can be sold in the Federation, has to be approved by the NTRC. But we can't tell them which one to sell. Once they are all approved, they can sell which one they feel to sell. So as far as we're concerned, the choices are there. I've gone to the stores, I've seen the choices. They might not be there, as the chairman said, for the guys who don't go the smart way, unfortunately.
Yeah.
No, there's no call.
There's no call. I wanted to make a point, Mr. Williams, which we didn't get to do earlier in our discussion, which is...
There's no call.
Oh, there's no call?
Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to the panel here.
Good afternoon.
My problem is I top up my phone with, say, $50 to put on the talk, the all talk, and $17 go for the internet for a week. And let's say the data run out. Why I cannot make a call when they don't take off all my money were left back on my phone? I can't get a call out, and I don't pay for the call then. The $25, the $24. So that is my problem. To me, Flow is raping us. Because I see as long as I don't pay for it, I'm supposed to could get call out. Please be with that for me.
Okay.
You see, if I may go first,
Yeah.
based on the information we just got from that caller, if we go back to Mr. Prentice's presentation on the consumer protection
Yes.
regulation, a lot of that just came out, a lot of those issues that were just highlighted by that caller will be captured and addressed in the consumer protection regulation, because it will now, those regulations will now ask the provider, the telecoms company, before you can sell the service or give the service to a consumer, you are to give to that consumer the terms and conditions in terms of the contractual arrangements, which must first be approved by the NTRC. So within that, we can see if you're being fair to the consumer. And if we find that the consumer is going to be treated unfairly, those draft contractual arrangements will ask to be edited and amended before they can be approved. So in time to come, let me use the that's crazy song, that one. In time to come,
Yeah.
these things will be captured and addressed seriously in the new regulations.
Okay, and I want to follow up because I'm glad Mr. Williams came first, because one of the difficulties that we face as a regulatory commission is how do the ordinary man in the street access the NTRC to get a difficulty he's suffering from dealt with. Whilst we have limited capacity, is that the way we're putting it, to deal with complaints,
I'll support that.
the mechanism for dealing with is not to pick up the phone and call somebody that you know in the NTRC or call one of the commissioners. It doesn't work that way. And as a people, we need to understand, if you're making a complaint, you need to put it in writing.
Yes.
And you, in time to come, as Mr. Williams is saying, once we get the EC bill passed, we will put in place a simple mechanism where you could come up to the NTRC and just fill out a simple form and sign it. And says, hey, I am suffering this, these are the facts, this is what I'm complaining about, date, time, occurrence, and so on. And sign it. And then we will then have something that we could deal with the service provider with. We cannot go to service provider and say, I just got a phone call from a man who says that he paid his money and he is not getting his service. It doesn't work that way. We have to learn to put complaints in writing, because then we have
Yes.
a paper trail to follow up with.
Sure. Okay. Now, where are we in terms of digital TV in the OECS?
Well, I don't know if we could speak for the OECS.
St. Kitts. Let's talk about St. Kitts and Nevis.
And when you say digital TV, you care to define? Because digital TV is a very broad-based subject.
The implementation of.
What about, you're not specifically talking about our host, ZSZ.
No.
Just checking. Just checking.
I think. I mean,
You know.
in terms of digital TV, well, what we would consider to be digital TV,
We have a call.
we have a call.
Working for you. Good afternoon. Hello.
Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good
Good
afternoon.
afternoon.
Carl Brown here, and good afternoon to the listening public, home and abroad. Guys, one of the things I have realized, though we have the OECS, we have CARICOM, and though we are from across the Caribbean, is no way that you could get calling from St. Kitts to all those other lands as a local call. Because one of the things we have to look at, each of these islands and each of these organizations have different laws that they act into their parliament concerning these regulations, concerning the different phones and that sort of thing. In America would be different because America have so much of different phone companies and agents and things like that, where while here in the Caribbean we have just a few, and each and every one of them are competing against the other for, let's say, the best company. Not that that ain't happening in the US, but what is happening here is that you find at times the OECS will put into place a law or some rules and regulations. Then you have CARICOM come behind with something else completely different to the OECS. Am I wrong, guys?
No, you're not.
No, you're correct. You're correct.
I think if I may, while you're on the line, though, I think that's the beauty of technology. In as much as you have disparate countries, you have however many countries within the region. Technology at this point in time is assisting us to circumvent all of the inadequacies in our different legal systems. Yes. So have you ever used WhatsApp calling? Have you ever used a Magic Jack? Have you ever used Viber?
Right.
These services are allowing you to make calls for free internationally. Forget about the region. You can pick up your phone, your smartphone, and I hope you have one, and use WhatsApp and call somebody in Russia if you so choose. And that is the beauty of technology. So we are no longer bound by what the telecoms companies are offering us. Technology has allowed us to circumvent, and that is why we've spoken about convergence, the use of the over-the-top services, exactly, which is why net neutrality is so important. We're using technology to get around all of these issues.
Another thing, guys, I heard a question was asked to y'all about digital. And a lot of the Caribbean island has not moved into that yet. But I have learned, and some of you guys here can answer, that is several years now our cable have moved into digital. What is stopping it from operating and giving it to the general public? That has been out here for several years now, but we still on the normal, what we get in those lot of trouble with those boxes and things, and we understand the digital lines being run, maybe not quite exactly complete yet, but we understand that it could be up and running in no time. What is the hanging on?
Well,
and this
Mr. Brown
has been done several years now.
Mr. Brown, that is a question that you ought to take up with the service provider. The regulatory machinery can't speak to that. If digital TV was employed and you as a digital TV subscriber or customer had a problem, then we could deal with it. But we can't dictate to commercial organizations, companies, and tell them what technology to use. We are technology neutral. Because if we had to dictate to them what technology to use, we would be in the dark ages for a long, long time. And
no, I'm not asking you guys to think. I'm just asking the question as the question was asked. One other thing is, seeing that for so many years now, you guys saying that CARICOM come with something over 17 years, you trying to get this act into place. Are you guys any closer now?
Oh, much closer. We are closer in a matter of months and not years.
Well, we really hope so, because I know 17 years is quite a long time.
Well, yeah, that is true. But, you know, when a baby is born, it takes a long time for it to grow to be an adult. That's just a factor of life.
Okay, Carl.
All right.
Thank you so much. Working for you. Good afternoon.
Hello?
Hello?
Okay, I could hear you now.
Yes, good.
Yeah, I'm the guy who asked you first question. Right now, geographically, Mr. Manchester said it like it is. America, they are all one piece of land. Well, geographically, we in the Caribbean are not the same one piece of land. But when you look at the West Indies cricket team, all the members on the West Indies cricket team do not come from the same one country. It's many countries, but they are all called the West Indies. And so, I am saying this, CARICOM, when you look at it, the DNA of CARICOM, we are all the same. So that's the technical part of it. Why I think it should be, just like how in America, not because we're not touching one another in land, but we are the same in terms of genes and the DNA. So that was the question, the answer I was looking for to the question. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I just want to clarify something. It's less about one piece of land, but that's a factor. But I think Mr. Prentice put it quite succinctly. It's about jurisdiction. It's about governance. They have one commission, one set of legislation that govern all the states, and therefore it's significantly easier for those kinds of things to occur.
Yes, and we have to be mindful too that the sovereignty kicks in.
Oh, that word.
Sovereignty kicks in immediately when you're going to move from here to tell a company in Trinidad that they ought to do this and they ought to do that. They're going to say to you, you are from St. Kitts and Nevis. You can't come here and tell me how to do things because my laws are sovereign. And so the sovereignty thing trumps every other thing we might think of moving towards.
And there was no pun intended when you said Trump.
We are going to close the phone lines for this program, and we are going to start wrapping up. It's now time, we're almost out of time. But you have touched on a number of key issues pertaining to telecommunications. What would you say have been some of the major challenges to telecommunications over the years? Mr. Manchester.
Sure. When you say over the years, that's...
I know.
For me...
What would be?
That would be when I first got into telecoms in 1966 until now. And that's a long, long time. Challenges. One is, in my view, the significant challenge would have been the cable and wireless monopoly and the basis on which they never innovated. There was no incentive to innovate, right? I mean, we're the only people providing the service. You guys take what you get. That kind of mentality, that mindset. And so it was a major challenge to break that down into opening telecoms to competition. Much like opening broadcasting to other radio stations other than our host ZAZ. But I don't think, in all honesty, that ZAZ has suffered because of that. I think that ZAZ benefited from having other radio stations, not the least of which are the standards of operation. And that is one of the things that that I have found in my years that the telecoms industry benefited from competition, the improvement in standards,
Sure.
the improvement in innovation by service providers, the disruptive technology coming in and really hammering the old business models. And I mean, to date, some of them don't even want to change. They've seen the light, but they don't want to change. And this is unfortunate.
Why do you refer to it as disruptive technology?
Because that's what it is. It changes the way we do things.
That's what you mean by disruptive.
Yeah, it is disruptive in the sense that as Mr. Prentice said, the traditional way of doing things is challenged.
It upsets the apple cart.
It
upsets the apple cart.
It
Yeah, that's
upsets the
basically what
apple
it
cart.
is,
Yes.
So-
You know, and when the apples get dumped out the cart, we find that underneath the apples was some pineapples or some other fruit that was just as delicious. You understand what I'm
Yes,
saying?
of course.
Right, and I think that I'll give you an example. When last you heard about a telex machine? Have you ever heard of one?
A very long time now.
Good. Disruptive technology got rid of faxes, forced telex machines out of business, right? When last year anybody said I sent a fax or received a fax,
A very long time too.
emails forced that out, and that is the disruption.
Yes.
And what happens when technology that disrupts comes along is that we as users of the service benefit.
When was the last time you saw a BlackBerry?
If
These
everyone
are more
we
recent.
just had that discussion the other day in my
So-
office.
Well, I saw one this morning. I have one. I still have one on my desk.
I have one still. Though.
So I think that's
Not in use, but I have one.
above everything else. I think that's the beauty of technology. It's very
evolving.
It
It's-
evolves very rapidly. There's a law that says technology, the speed of your devices. Moore's law. It's called Moore's law.
Moore's law.
It doubles roughly every 18 months. So if you use that as a sort of benchmark in terms of the rate at which technology advances, you see every 18 months you're getting twice as much
Right.
computing power as you had previously.
The Apple
that's a very
iPhone
fast.
8
8 is
will soon debut,
yes.
and I think the Samsung 8
S8.
It's here.
is already out.
Yes.
It's here,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
so on, and it keeps changing all the time.
Yes.
But the important factor
Can we
of
keep up?
Well,
who's the we?
the question
Well,
is
who's the we?
The consumer.
there's
Well,
a,
the consumer is what drives the Apple aids.
That is so.
You know, and the Samsung aids, because I saw a commercial once which explained this whole thing. People were waiting outside an Apple store for a new Apple to come out, and two folks were there with Samsungs, and the fella said, "Boy, I got that new movie, you know," and he just put his phone close, you know, using what they call the NFC,
Near field communication.
right? And people say, "What was that?" And they explain. I hope this new Apple got that, you know.
Yeah.
It didn't, right? And so Samsung, it was a Samsung commercial keying off of Apple,
Yes.
and that is what competition brings,
Yes.
right? And so we all benefit. Where we lose out is when there is no competition. You know, that's where we lose out.
Okay, gentlemen, we have to wrap up. Is there anything you want to say before we go?
Well, I would like to see our people, our consumers, pay close attention to what's happening with the NTRC. We put out a lot of information on our website with respect to public consultations and so on, and we'd like people to participate. When the new EC bill is put before Parliament, sooner rather than later, I would like our people to get au fait with it. Try and get a copy, try and understand how best you can use it for your own benefit, because as there's a lot in there, as
Yes.
Mr. Prentice was saying, there's a lot in there for consumer protection, there's a lot in there for anti-competitive behavior by service providers and so on. And so there are a lot of benefits to be had. But you must also interface with the NTRC in the proper manner. You can't just phone the NTRC and say, I paid me money and I ain't getting this and I ain't getting that.
Sure.
Put it in writing. Let us have a record of your problem so that we can deal with it. And even though we don't have a lot of teeth right now, because we're waiting on the EC bill, there are still things that we can do. It doesn't, not having the EC bill doesn't make us impotent, right? But we just have, Mr. Williams is very adept at that, finding ways to deal with these, some of these things. Maybe we can't deal with all of them in their magnitude, but there are ways we can deal with things. But put your complaint in writing, please.
Mr. Prentice.
It was a pleasure being here, and I would like to second the motion in terms of eagerly anticipating the passage of the EC bill.
The
And
draft can be found on the
it can be found on the
ECTEL
website. That's www.ectel, ectel.int. Certainly have a look. ECTEL as a body is always open to feedback. There's, as Mr. Williams would have indicated, there's quite a robust consultative process that is ongoing. Not only on the EC bill, there's also the roaming bill. Also looking at things such as number portability, which we didn't even touch on. The ability of persons to keep the same number as you move between service providers.
Sure.
Those are all things that are hopefully coming on stream shortly.
Okay. And Director Williams.
Let me say thank you once more for having us here, and to use this opportunity to say that coming out of this, what I'm hoping for is to have a continued dialogue with the general public, because we have not been doing any PR to say that, and so this is our first shot at doing PR, and I'm really appreciative of the chairman and you having put this together. And so I'm inviting all those in the general public to visit the NTRC. We're on Fortlands here in Wigley Avenue. Have a talk with us, find out more, because we're here as your referee. It's not you versus Lime or you versus Digicel. We're here as your referee. And so I'm very glad for this opportunity to, in the first instance, do a bit of PR and to say who we are, what we stand for, and what we do. And so let me close by asking everybody to, when you do get a chance, one by one, not in the hundreds, because it's a small staff, to visit us, have a talk with us, see what we do, and become more enlightened with your regulatory commission. Thank you, Mr. Williams.
Right. Sure, Mr. Manchester.
I erred in not telling you thanks, Mr. Williams.
That's all right. I mean, I am very happy to have all three of you here to speak about such an important matter, that of the telecommunications sector. As you said, Mr. Prentice, I think you gave the internet penetration rate in St. Kitts.
Yes.
What you said it was?
Well, the fixed rate is 35%. The mobile penetration rate is 156%.
156.
That's for cell phones, essentially.
That is quite phenomenal
Yes.
for a small country like this.
And what is even more phenomenal, mobile has pushed down the fixed.
Yes.
Take-up.
Yes.
Right? Most people still have a line in their house, but it's for internet.
That is correct.
You know, they've given up their fixed line phone. Now, I haven't given up mine. And the reason for that is because the cost structure for picking up the phone and using it is a lot less than dialing on your cell phone. It is not as flashy or, modern, but I could, if I want to call one of my sisters, I pick up the phone and I call. If they're not at home, I leave a message.
Sure, okay.
And they'll call me back
Sure.
for 10 cents.
Right.
As against 15 cents.
How about free?
Free.
Free, yeah, free. That's what
WhatsApp.
free.
WhatsApp.
Well, we're technology neutral. We want to say free, but free using some technology.
Using some technology, not necessarily WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Because I have many of them out there.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Manchester, Mr. Prentice, and Mr. Williams, it was a pleasure.
Yes,
having
for us
you
too.
on this program.
Indeed.
You have been listening to another edition of Working for You. Today I had as my guest Mr. Cosbert Manchester, who is the chairman of the St. Kitts and Nevis National Telecommunications Regulatory Commission Board, Mr. Irvin Williams, director of the NTRC, and Mr. Quinty Prentice, who is director on the board of directors of the Eastern Caribbean Telecommunications Authority, known as ECTEL. For all of you who tuned into today's program, those of you who listened, those of you who called in, asked your question, gave suggestions, shared your feedback, we appreciate you very much. I am your host, Lesroy Williams. We would see you next week.
Working for you. A weekly talk radio program which highlights developments of national interest and the activities of your St. Kitts Nevis government. Join host Lesroy Williams as he presents news, views, reports, and interviews about everything regarding the activities of the Team Unity government and the building of our communities and the development of St. Kitts Nevis. Tune in and call in to interact with your government and share your views regarding the upward forward development of your community and our beautiful Twin Island Federation. Working for you ears weekly, every Wednesday live from 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. on ZIZ Radio, Win FM, and Sugar City FM with rebroadcast on participating stations. Working for you.